Hello, everybody.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. We're going to wait a couple more minutes before we officially start, but feel free to start conversation and discussion. It's going to be a free-flowing and interesting session, I hope. We have some really good people to talk about devices with, and I'm going to try and set the stage. And after that, all of you innovators, people, all of the stuff you wanted to ever ask away. We have a fair bit of expertise in innovation that will be here. So with that, just a quick reminder, we are trying to be a little human. So if you can and are able to maintain it, feel free to share your video so that we're seeing faces and not black boxes. And feel free to type any questions or comments that you might have in the chat. If you, during our discussion, wish to participate, feel free to unmute yourself. I would encourage you, though, to keep yourself muted if you have background distractions. So maybe we should get started. Let's see, there's about 20 of us, so let's get started with acknowledging this is delayed. Seconds. Okay, so this is the fifth of our little mini workshops as part of the Ideation Clinic Challenge with Praxis. Our hope is to generate, stimulate, and catalyze ideas around improving the lives of people living with spinal cord injuries. It's part of a greater project of developing a Canada-wide innovation ideation network in healthcare. So I welcome you to this fifth session. Today's focus is going to be on developing prototypes, but not so much on the prototypes themselves because of the nature of this talk, but on how regulation plays an important role in governing how we develop. So one of the sort of aha moments that I had a few years back about this was in speaking to somebody that ran a company that now has sold to Starfish Medical, which is one of the biggest now contract device developers in North America. And so when they sold the company, one of the things we were just talking about, one of the things they said that they had the hardest time with was actually accessing patients. And they have someone paying them a lot of money to develop a device. They know the regulation and the rules, but they need to go in and access patients so that they can meet the expectations patients have with the requirements they have for regulatory approval. So it was a kind of an interesting way working backwards by this group. So thus today's topic. And I don't know about you, but this slide, so we are going to have a quick primer, and with any luck, you'll actually see it and the slides will work. If not, we'll abandon the endeavor. And then we have a panel that will sort of talk about regulatory strategy thinking. What do you need to know about getting at approvals for devices? And we have two representatives from Health Canada with us and one token industry player. I thought that would make us smile. He's been a CEO of many companies that have been in this space and has a wealth of knowledge and experience. And then we'll talk about your questions and comments. So with that, Chris.
Thanks, Joseph. So my name's Chris Bomeister. I'm from the University of Toronto, Biomedical Engineering. And so I'd like to say that we wish to acknowledge this land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. And since this is a virtual meeting, you can consider the land that you're on today as well.
Thank you. So those of you joining us for the first time, the challenge that we've issued and continue to support people with is please demonstrate a transformative, commercializable concept to improve the quality of life of people living with spinal cord injuries. And all of these seminars and little workshops have been sort of around topics to do with developing your ideas towards commercialization. And so today we're going to talk about the relationship of prototypes and regulatory affairs. However, I think that before we get there, I should probably get a few introductions out of the way. I want to acknowledge, first of all, the team members that are here from the Ideation Clinic, Jillian, Chris, Julia, Zoya, and I don't see anyone else on my screen, so I apologize if I missed you. But I also want to introduce our panelists, whom I'm going to welcome to jump in at any point, actually, as I'm talking about these things. I hope to make this quick so we can move on to your portions. But I want to introduce you up front, I think, to front load you so that if you have any input or insights in any of the things I say, or just want to call me out for being completely wrong, that's also welcome. So let's start with Brian.
Thank you very much. Brian Thornton. I work for the Medical Devices Directorate of Health Canada. I've been there now for 3 years, and currently I am working on and with the COVID-19 team to really expedite bringing in medical devices for Canadians. But as a whole, my job is stakeholder engagement, really reaching out, developing relationships with our stakeholders out there to improve the medical devices that are available on the Canadian market. So thank you very much, Joseph.
Excellent. Jade?
Yeah, thank you. I'm Jade. I work for the Medical Devices Directorate for almost 5 years now. I started as a classification officer, then I led the regulatory screening team, and I had been fully involved in regulatory screening of interim orders for COVID-19 devices all last year since it started in March 2020. And most recently, I'm responsible for stakeholder engagement to share our experience and knowledge on medical devices regulatory framework. Thank you.
Thank you. And last but not least of our panelists, I'd like to call on Paul to give a little quick blurb about what he does.
Hi guys, serial medtech entrepreneur, co-founder and CEO of Profound Medical, where I raised 16 mil. That started out as a PMA and we pivoted strategically to 510K. Currently the CEO, recently appointed CEO and president of Insight Medbotics, which is out of McMaster, MR-guided technology to biopsy breast cancer. And in between, I lecture strategy, entrepreneurship, and innovation at half a dozen universities on both sides of the Atlantic.
Excellent. I'd also like to introduce Alexis. Alexis is one of our facilitators, lived experience facilitators, who has been joining us and giving perspectives on sort of some of the issues we've been discussing.
Definitely, this is a topic I'm going to be just listening to because I'm intrigued by all of the minds that are here today. So I look forward to the topic.
Excellent. And is Terry here? I'm just trying to find So I'd like her to also introduce herself if she is around.
I know she was planning on it. Might have been delayed, maybe. I'll text her. I'll figure it out.
Yeah, I saw her for a bit. I don't see her on my list anymore, and that's so. I do see Arushi. If Arushi wants to say a hello from the Praxis Institute, but if not,
hi everyone. Yeah, I'm the director of commercialization at Praxis. I think Brian, we've met, so great to see you again. And yeah, really excited to this section, the meat and potatoes of how do you you might have a great idea, but what are some of the constraints? So yeah, very excited to attend this session.
excellent. Okay, without further ado, let me get my piece out of the way very quickly so we can get to the real meat of this and talk to people that know what they're talking about. So with that, we've sort of been following this key towards design ideas. And we're sort of at this design stage in terms of our concepts and talking. And the design stage actually is made up of processes and things like prototyping, evaluating those prototypes, and then iterating. And that's kind of what I'm going to talk about very quickly today. But also in this process, one of the most important things that I've sort of found over the years is while you're doing prototyping, while you're building out your ideas, it is incredibly important to think about at least 3 factors that are very important in health tech or anything related to do with health care or health delivery. And those 3 factors are intellectual property, regulatory affairs, which we will be sort of tackling today, and ethics. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your perspective, in healthcare, you can't just run out and start talking to clients or patients. For example, you can't run into an ICU and say, hey, I'm just doing some design research. What's your opinion of X? If you were designing a cell phone, you might be able to run to a mall and get some insights. In healthcare, it doesn't work the same way. Not only are you not necessarily able to access patients directly, patients are not the only stakeholders. In addition to patients, who are the people in the hospitals, are people that are living with experience, with morbidities, with comorbidities that are in the community. There are people who pay for our healthcare that are not necessarily the ones that use the products that are being developed. There are people that prescribe the products that aren't the ones that use them or pay for them. So in healthcare, it's particularly messy compared to other strategies or other spheres. So when we talk about design, design is a complicated thing. And I think in future iterations of this, we will actually do some work on designing ideas, more hands-on. But one of the most important parts about design is being able to make your ideas more and more concrete as you go. And so prototyping is one of the key sort of foundations of most design frameworks. And when we talk about prototypes, it's about designing something where you start out really broadly and refine it as you go. So in our particular space, what's really important, especially when thinking about people with lived experience, people with spinal cord injuries, is that we don't start out by building something we think somebody needs. That we start out actually by engaging people. As soon as you have an idea, you need to go out and talk to people with lived experience. At the end of the day, they're the ones that will shape any innovation that has meaningful impact on their lives. So it's really important, rather to build than build in isolation, to go out and talk and engage with people, and not just one or two. So I may have a particular need, that doesn't mean that my need is exactly the same with someone who has my condition and has a slightly different life experience, cultural experience, stage of life. There are many, many factors that go in. So as people that are trying to make ideas into innovations, we need to understand that starting with the people we're trying to work with, to help, to impact, is absolutely important and crucial. And the earlier you can do it, the better, because it means saving yourself a lot of time, grief, and potentially money. The easiest way to do that, or the main way to do that, is through a form of prototyping that most people don't even consider prototyping, conceptual prototypes. And these can be incredibly low fidelity. These can be literally a block of wood in your hand to test a Palm Pilot in the olden days. That's what they did to see how big they would want to make it. Rather than building the whole device, the whole machine, they took a block of wood and went around to people. Can you hold this? So engaging with people with a block of wood is significantly less costly than building a device and its guts and infrastructure and then having to scrap everything and start from scratch. Conceptual prototypes can be statements on a piece of paper. They can be pieces of paper, but there's something that you're trying to do to get your idea across. And whether for Health Canada or for FDA or other regulatory jurisdictions, starting out with a concept and trying to clearly outline it and showing that design engagement tends to be very important. So being able to understand what is needed for approval is also important, because that helps you design your concept, conceptual prototypes, and further stages of your idea. As you move forward and you get more and more insight, that's when you start moving towards more fidelity towards the final product. You may not necessarily have the final product when you are going out for trials or engagement with people. In fact, there is research to show that the less developed a product is, the more likely you are to get opinions and insights from people. Because people, when they see something that is half done or sort of unfinished, they feel more comfortable criticizing you. If they think you've put in a lot of work into something, even if they think it's a horrible idea, they're likely going to say, oh, it's not bad. I talked to one entrepreneur one time who was a surgeon who developed a device, said he talked to all of his friends about his device and they all loved it. They stood in a huddle around the device and all of the surgeons said, oh, this is just great, just great. Oh, this is absolutely amazing. Nobody ever bought it, because although they thought it was great because they were trying to be nice to him, none of them would have invested any money into it. So it's important to keep refining your prototype. And as you refine it closer and closer, you will get to a minimal viable product, which is where essentially now you're starting to think about, you know, how do I place it? How do I sell it? And eventually, how do I scale it? And so each stage of the fidelity of prototyping has advantages and disadvantages. Cost being a major one. At the early, you save. If you can look at your idea and either make it fail very quickly or refine it at the stage where it's paper prototyping or conceptual, then you've saved a lot of time before you start manufacturing and doing more high fidelity developments. That's essentially, I keep pressing the wrong button. That's essentially one of the main reasons to go through this prototyping iteration. Most of the people I work with, they're very excited to go out into market and start doing business plans, and they're very excited and start making mission statements. But realistically, until you have something to sell, until you have something that helps people and people want, that meets an actual need, it's very hard to develop a business plan that will be effective. And so prototypes, low fidelity, mid fidelity, and this iterative cycle is incredibly valuable for engagement with stakeholders, for the kind of feedback and refinement you need to develop a good product, and also to look at how to express requirements and missed potentials. So that's really the main thrust of my sort of overview, except that I want to contextualize where the panelists are going to be sort of talking about, or the issues I want to pose to them. And that is, in this process, in this pathway, and this is a generalized pathway to market, quite often you will start with discovery, research, or knowledge, an aha moment, an idea, which then follows understanding the problem, verifying it, looking at the market, looking at needs, looking at people, seeing if there's any real traction. Then another round is we'll start going through ideation and development, which then leads to some sort of testing. Now, within health devices, the level of testing is kind of what we're going to talk about for devices here. But it can be things like preclinical engagement within hospitals or clinics. It can be clinical trials when it comes to pharma and drugs. It can be regulatory trials and tests with devices before you get some form of approval for them in order to move it forward and translate it towards a market or a marketable product, service, or pharmaceutical, or to scale and diffuse it and look at procurement, and then surveillance, post-market surveillance, and evidence to build policy or investment. But I want to sort of say that this is not by any means a linear kind of process. And if the slides were updating, you would see that there are a number of little arrows that happen, and there's cycles that go on. And in particular, I want to draw your attention to the 4 squares around prototype, develop, clinical, and regulatory. So this is the space we're in actually, and we're talking about today. And my point sort of going into this is, the more you know about the regulatory pathways for what devices and what pharmaceuticals and what needs to have regulation, the better off you are from the very beginning of your prototyping of ideas, because you can adjust your prototypes to meet the expectations of regulators. And I cannot stress how important that is. They are here to work with you and to work with people to actually help you succeed. It's never been my experience that the people in device regulatory or pharmaceuticals are there to stop you. They actually want to help you. The problem is when you don't consult with them, or when there isn't proper engagement and discussion, then you don't know how to navigate the system. And that starts potentially creating new challenges. So with that, advice is know your destination before you plan out your path. Know where you're going. Measure twice, cut once type of philosophy. And when it comes to device development and developing strategy, it's absolutely crucial. So with that, I'm going to take a breather. Does anyone want to jump in and ask, did that make sense? The context? I do not see any hands or responses of any kind. Assuming, oh wait, there's the chat still. Okay, so I am going to then introduce our panelists. They've also they started introducing themselves, so I don't think we have to spend a lot of time, but Brian, Jade, and Paul are here to talk about this pathway towards innovation. And with that, I'm going to go to each of you and ask sort of, what's your experience? What's the one most important thing that you wish innovators, people with ideas knew or should know before starting device imagination, development, and prototyping?
And there you go. Okay. So especially for spinal cords, stimulation systems. So we have devices licensed that are of high risk devices. They are high risk devices because they are intended to be used in the for the central nervous system, which is, the spinal cord is part of it. So these devices are class 4 devices, which means the regulatory pathway is different from low risk devices like class 2s. So what are the expectations? Health Canada's expectation is to request, what should manufacturers or, the person who designs the device knows before coming to license those high-risk devices is to expect to provide information on bench testing, software verification and validation, clinical studies, animal studies, material specifications, quality control activities in terms of quality quality management certification, biocompatibility testing too. All these are requirements for class 4 devices. We do request similar information for class 3s too, but the requirements are slightly different because class 4 are high risk devices. So we do request more information. And in addition to that, we ask for a device description, an instruction for use, device labeling, device packaging, and any incident reports on that are we had from clinical studies or overseas. Incident reports that have been reported to other regulatory agencies like the US FDA, the TGA in Australia, and any elsewhere outside Canada. That's our expectations for class 4.
Well, I think that's very important. So first of all, I guess I want to back up a little bit, and maybe this is where the overview of what you do is important, because the role of Health Canada in this space is to ensure safety and efficacy. It is to ensure that the more risk there is with something that is used around people, the more it is tested and the more accountable and responsible manufacturers are held. So in Canada, and this is not the same as the United States or the EU, and who knows what will happen in the UK or other jurisdictions, we have 4 classes of devices. And so we have those devices which are not classified as medical. So it would be interesting, especially now with the growth of home care and community care, to understand the difference between when I'm using a device at home versus using the same device potentially in a hospital room, whether there's a difference in how it's classified. But then we have a scale of 1 to 4, 1 being the least risky, the lowest level of impact on people. And the more potentially, the more risk associated with the device, the higher the classification. Is that a fair statement?
So can I answer this question? Is it a question or a statement?
No,
So
no, no,
it's both.
it's a question. If you'd like to go
Yeah.
and talk more
Yeah.
about what you do.
Yeah, just to let know everyone that classification of medical devices is complex. So even if we have classification rules set out in the medical devices regulations, but we rely on the device label. By device label, we look at the indication for use. So it's the indication for use that determines the device classification. And by indication for use, we look at the device invasiveness, maybe the location for use, which is the case for in vitro diagnostic devices. Any home use in vitro diagnostic device is a class 3 device, except for pregnancy and fertility testing. Those are just examples. So in terms of classification, we have a service to provide to confirm classification of medical devices. So we are willing to help manufacturers or universities or research institutions to confirm a device classification, even if you don't have a device designed yet, but you have the indication for use for which you are planning to design a device. We can help you confirm its classification, even if you don't have a finalized version. And in addition to that, if you have a device, you have the device label finalized and a user manual, we have another service which is pre-submission meetings. So you are planning to come and license a device in Canada, you can ask for a pre-submission meeting and show us your device. So we have those pre-submission meeting is to help manufacturers understand our requirements and show us the device and how we can help them to streamline the process of licensing.
And Jade, if you wouldn't mind if I could jump in here, this is something we're going to be talking about a little bit later that we have in our presentation. Jade really hit on the major points where this is technical information. This is complex information, and the thing that everyone has to remember is, and I'm sure Paul can really add to this, where you've been surrounded by the device for so long, we're seeing it for the first time. Quality of information. I get asked so many times by manufacturers, how long is this going to take? How long is this going to take? And unfortunately, yes, we do have service standards that we go by. We're always trying to meet those service standards. But when it comes down to it, it's really about the quality of information that you're collecting and submitting to Health Canada. It reduces the higher the quality, the less questions you have. Of course, there's going to be questions, there's going to be back and forth, but it reduces these. And like Jade was speaking about, it's getting that connection with Health Canada. We're not an organization where we're behind some glass, we're behind some brick wall that you can't access. More and more every day, we're trying to reach the manufacturers to develop this relationship so we can have things like an international meeting, we can have a pre-sub meeting, we can have a technical meeting. We can provide these resources because nothing will help the process better than a scientist speaking to a scientist, an engineer speaking to an engineer. When you can get two parties that come together speaking the same language, the process is just so much more efficient and it just flows better. So I just wanted to add that.
So I think that's a very important point to stress. So all of you that are listening and future iterations that listen to this video, it is really something that I know I myself have in the past taken advantage of, but I didn't actually know this until I started working on a project and faced a roadblock and then contacted Health Canada. And they were very helpful. And the person that was looking at my file was very helpful to guide me and steer me in the right direction. As opposed to most often, what people do is get frustrated because they can't understand the rule or they can't understand something and try to do it themselves and don't get help and seek help. If you're not an expert, you have to find an expert or talk to experts. Paul, what has been your experience?
Well, I'll go back to what do you think is the most important thing of that hierarchy? I would say 2 or 3 things. The first one is common sense. I know that sounds, we've all got it in varying degrees, but common sense suggests that A, you should speak to the customer, the end user, as much as you can to begin with. As you said, don't have a astrophysicist don't have 20 astrophysicists be the advisor for what your tongue depressor should be, because it's probably going to be over-engineered. That's the first thing. The second thing is, when you've worked out it's a tongue depressor at one end of the spectrum, which is the lollipop stick, for non-medical device classification, when it's a lollipop stick or it's a laser-based eye corrective technology, you know, based on common sense, one of those is relatively easy to make and relatively easy to get hold of. And the complexities of explaining that to someone at a regulatory body like Health Canada is going to be less technical and easier than explaining a laser-based eye thing. Common sense should also tell you that you should get more expertise in multiple levels when you're doing the laser-based eye thing. And common sense should also tell you that, well, you know, whatever the conversation is going to be like with Health Canada, I know that the level of lollipop stick is going to be way easier than the level of laser-based opto thing. So my lollipop stick could be 10 grand. My laser-based thing could be 10 million, and somewhere in between the two are a couple of other levels of complexity, and we won't, maybe my colleagues will go into that in a bit more detail. But ultimately, kind of going right back to the beginning, as Jade said, we're looking in the Praxis challenge here at spinal cord activity. It's usually more complex. The safety requirements, because this is the fundamental Hippocratic oath, do no harm. That's where you start. And if you're starting at do no harm, then it's relatively easy, common sense wise, to work out what a lollipop stick's going to do relative to a laser-based opto technology. So one, talk to your customers, get the right segment of people who are qualified to speak about what it is you're trying to make for them, and get them to tell you the God's honest truth as per Joseph's perspective on how raw this is. This is a raw version. Here it is, kick the crap out of it and tell me what's wrong with it. And most people will quite happily do that. And then, you know, using common sense, frame the complexity of the technology, and the more complex it gets, probably the more expensive it's going to be. And the more complex it gets, the more experts you're going to need to speak the same language from your product and your technology to the qualified people at Health Canada, who are going to also want to hear how that translates into their language of safety first, efficacy second. That's my perspective anyway. By the way, I apologize for sniffing. It's not COVID, it's pollen. Today is just something else. It's pollen today, not COVID. I've had my shot.
So Jade and Brian, do you want to go a little bit about Health Canada at this point and just go over your presentation of who you are and what you do and sort of the context of Medical Devices Directorate?
Yes, so I'll be responsible for presenting the 2 first slides, then I'll leave the rest for Brian to take over.
Sorry, it just went forward. Just let me know when you're ready.
We can go to the next slide.
Okay.
So yeah, so sorry for the condensed information in both slides. So today's presentation is meant to provide you with like general overview of the Medical Devices Directorate, roles and responsibilities, and our regulatory framework. We also wanted to share with you some our stakeholder engagement activities. So that's Brian's part. By regulatory framework, we refer to guiding principle when processing medical device license applications, classification of medical devices, and any additional regulatory information on how medical devices are approved before being sold in the Canadian market. So what we do, we authorize medical devices used on human only. And how we do it, we review the scientific information, we make sure the device has a label, has a packaging information, has the manufacturer's information, the device identifier before being sold in the Canadian market. So the aim thing of that is to make sure those devices are safe and effective and of high quality as per the Food and Drugs Act and the medical devices regulations. In addition to that, so in addition to authorizing medical devices for the Canadian market, we review applications for clinical trials. For the medical devices side, we call them investigational testing authorizations. So we make sure studies are well designed and participants are safe. We know REBs are responsible for this too, but we do it ourselves too. And in a few occasions, we authorize unlicensed medical devices through what we call special access program. So those devices are not available in the Canadian market, but we can authorize them for like single use. So we can have a healthcare professional comes and submit an authorization, an application for an unlicensed medical device. It's just one unit of that device. Maybe it's licensed in overseas, but it's not in the Canadian market. So we don't obligate manufacturers to come authorize their devices in the Canadian market. We know it's a small market, so there is no obligation, but we have a way to authorize those devices for an emergency use. In addition to that, we make sure Canadians are well informed. How? By posting online what we name summary basis of decisions. So summary basis of decision are scientific evidence of devices that we have authorized for the Canadian market. Summary basis of decision are posted online for high-risk devices, which are class 3s and 4 medical devices. In terms of the Medical Devices Directorate organization, we are 6 bureaus. I mean, we are divided up in 6 bureaus and offices. We have the Director General Office, the Bureau of Licensing Services, the Bureau of Investigational Testing Authorization, Special Access Program, and Post-Market Surveillance, the Bureau of Scientific Evaluation, the Bureau of Planning and Operation, to which we belong, both Brian and myself, and the Bureau of Policy and International Programs, responsible for collaboration with other regulatory agencies like US FDA. Because our today's topic is regulatory, I wanted to highlight some responsibilities for 2 bureaus responsible for licensing medical devices. So we have the Bureau of Licensing Services and the Bureau of Evaluation. The Bureau of Licensing Services is responsible for authorizing medical devices, class 1, 2, 3, and 4. We also provide information on medical devices classification and any external request on scientific evidence. So we have a team dealing with external requests. So please feel free to come and reach out to us for any questions or concerns. And in addition to that, we have the Bureau of Scientific Evaluation. So within that bureau, that is responsible for scientific review of license applications. We have digital health section responsible for reviewing, for example, diagnostic imaging devices, lasers, software devices. We have the in vitro devices section responsible for scientific review of HIV test kits, blood glucose meters, for example. We have the cardiovascular section responsible for scientific review of pacemakers, heart valves, or any related devices. We have the musculoskeletal devices section responsible for reviewing any orthopedic or dental implants devices. And finally, we have the general and restorative devices responsible for licensing devices. For example, we have the ophthalmic devices and ventilators. Next slide, please. So this is just, a general overview of the main bureaus responsible for regulatory processing of license applications. So if we go to the next slide.
Just working on it. Sorry, 2 seconds.
Okay.
Says it's starting.
So in this slide, we have a lot of information on our regulatory framework. The key information we need to know is that we rely on 3 types of regulatory tools to license medical devices in Canada, which are the Food and Drugs Act, the Medical Devices Regulations, and the various guidance documents. So it's really hard to, to understand the information within the Food and Drugs Act and the Medical Devices Regulations. So Health Canada came with what we call guidance documents, where we can find information on how we classify medical devices, how to complete a license application, and how to submit scientific evidence for license application based on the risk class. So under the medical devices regulations, we have part 1, part 2, and part 3. Part 1 describes the licensing requirement of medical devices and the various regulated parties obligations. By regulated parties, we refer to manufacturers, distributors, and importers of medical devices. Part 2 is of the regulations provides healthcare professionals with access to devices for emergency use. So that's the special access program. And part 3 is for authorizing the importation and sale of medical devices to be used in investigational testing, which are clinical trials on medical devices. In terms of classification of medical devices, this is another part. It's another topic. So we classify medical devices in 4 classes, which are class 1, 2, 3, and 4. The risk classification of the device depends on different factors, which are the invasiveness, as I mentioned previously, the duration of contact on human body, and whether the device's activity depends on a source of energy, which are active medical devices. We name them active medical devices. So just a few examples of those classes. So for class 1, we have, for example, any reusable surgical instruments, bandages, hospital beds, wheelchairs. Class 2, we have blood pressure monitors, contact lenses, pregnancy tests, MRI machines. For class 3s, we have dental implants, ventilators. For class 4, we have anything that is defibrillators, stents, heart valves, HIV tests, neurosurgical shunts, and even the spinal cord stimulators that are class 4. So in terms of what should manufacturers know before filing a license applications? This is an important part of this presentation, is to submit to submit an application form to determine the appropriate regulatory pathway, because the regulatory pathway, I mean, the type of information we request for licensing a medical device is dependent to its classification. We request more information for high-risk devices that are class 3s and 4. We need to know the fee associated to the license application, and in addition to that, which is a regulatory, I mean, we consider it as a regulatory burden, is the quality management certificate that is called ISO 13485. This is a regulatory burden and is a requirement to license any device class that is 2, 3, or 4. Is not mandatory for class 1 devices because they are low risk devices, but this quality management certificate that has to be MDSAP certification, which is medical device single audit program, is a mandatory requirement for licensing medical devices in Canada. And it's sometimes because of high, I mean, how I wanted to say this. I'm trying to find my word because I know the word in French, but I don't know it in English. So I mean, to get the quality management certificate 1313485 that is MDSAP certified might cost up to $50,000 for a high risk device. And this is an important information to know for those devices. So this quality management certificate is a proof of manufacturing and designing of a medical device in a proper way, I would say, of high quality. So that's all I wanted to highlight in those 2 slides. Just before I forget, please feel free to ask your questions. I also wanted to say this in French. So j'encourage les francophones à poser vos questions en français. Je me ferai un plaisir d'y apporter des clarifications. Merci. Thank you.
Missy, Jade, does anybody have any questions for Jade before we move on? Okay, I'll jump right into it then. So, so the next slide is vendor days. It's one of the initiatives that we've been really working on. Like I indicated before, Health Canada is really trying to reach out. We're trying to create more of a through the process when it comes to information. We receive information, we give information, giving the ability to come together and share information. So vendor days is something we came up with, and unfortunately, many of us can say this, and I know everyone's sick of hearing it, but of course, COVID really put a stop to all this. We started getting some really good momentum. We had our first vendor days. It was December 2019. So the vendor days are intended for manufacturers of medical devices to set up kiosks and really have like a learn and touch. Like I indicated before, excuse me, that we haven't seen your device. You could have been intimately involved with this device from 1 to up to 10 years, know everything about it. We don't. And having that ability to really touch something, to move it, to ask questions, it went really well. The feedback that we got was extremely positive, and we want to continue pushing these forward and having more vendor days. Obviously, right now we're under restrictions. We're at the stay-at-home order. We can't go into the offices. I wish I had a timeline for you right now when we feel that the Health Canada offices are going to be back to, I guess, the new normal. But I don't have it. We have a really good team of people that are actively pursuing this, looking at the different information that we have to kind of gauge when we can be back into the office, but that hasn't been released publicly yet. So the days were organized by theme. The one we did was orthopedic and dental implants. I think we ended up having 13 vendors, I do believe, and we just stretched them out in one of our buildings on Tunney's Pasture, And those manufacturers were able to come in with their device, show it, give all the information. They brought their sales team, they brought their engineering team, they brought their scientific team, and our scientists and our engineers and our general management were able to come in and ask any questions. And once again, it went extremely well. One of the feedback that we did get from it is people are stretched right across the country, and maybe they don't have the resources. The question was, well, why can you come out to the West Coast? Here's the thing. This is really the benefit of having a relationship with Health Canada and the manufacturer. So having one manufacturer come out to see 240 Health Canada employees is much more beneficial than trying to ever budget 240 employees coming out to the West Coast. Very difficult, as you can imagine. So really the benefit is having those manufacturers come to Ottawa. But I'm really interested that if anybody has any feedback, I would love to hear just any virtual ideas that they have. I know everyone's really thinking out of the box right now, and some great things are coming out of it on how we can relate internationally, how we can relate nationally, West Coast to the East Coast, and really connect better with some of the resources that are available because of this pandemic. So the pre-pandemic plan is to have events take place in Ottawa so the maximum number of Health Canada staff could attend, and plans are underway to hold vendor days on a virtual environment. But once again, I really, if there's any feedback that people can give, it would be greatly appreciated, and will be taken to heart. So can I have the next slide, please?
So you know what, Brian, before we go into the next slide,
Sure.
Maybe there's an opportunity here with Praxis and some of the things we're building out. So one of our deliverables is a demo day in July, and we could use that as a way of inviting some of your people to test the system that then allows presentation of demos to you around the space of spinal cord innovation. And get some feedback, and if you like it or if you get used to it, or you can then adopt it for broader demo days.
I welcome the information. Absolutely.
Okay, so maybe that's an opportunity here that we can discuss and figure out if there's any way that we can coordinate. Since this is a pilot for us too, and since we do have people from across the country, it may actually work out as a good pilot for you as well. So Jade, I just wanted to make sure that there are a couple of questions for you in the chat.
Yeah, I was doing my best to provide some
it's good.
answers.
It's great.
Thank you.
So let me help you with the next slide is on, Brian.
Sure. So some of the other initiatives that we've been really looking at, and Jade was speaking about before, is innovation meetings. And I want you to think a little bit broader when innovation meetings. It doesn't just have to be an innovative device. There are opportunities for pre-submission meetings. The one thing that I do want to communicate is when we're talking about these meetings, they have to be created in a sense that everyone is going to get the most out of it. We don't want this to be, I have some general questions, so I'm going to put in a request to have a innovation meeting, because what's going to happen is we're going to get some really key individuals, and we're all maxed right out with our time, and we're really trying to put our best foot forward. But saying that, we really do want to ensure that if we are going to have these meetings, that we have everyone from your organization that needs to be there. Once again, the scientific individual, the engineering, labeling, you want all these things put together. So this way, when we do have that meeting, and they don't have to be long and intense. Right now, on a daily basis, I have half-hour meetings with manufacturers all across the world that have a medical device, especially an in vitro diagnostic device, that Canadians may be interested in. And in a half hour, I can bring together our technical people, and we can discuss, we can have an outbound conversation and an inbound conversation, share documentation, and start a relationship, only in a half hour. So imagine what you can do with an hour, 2 hours. The only thing, once again, that I just want to really press is that we want to make sure that it's not just worthwhile for yourselves, but it's worthwhile with the expertise that you're going to get, that we utilize those individuals in that time. So the purpose of the innovation meetings or technology pipeline meetings is to allow the director to really engage with the manufacturers of novel technologies. So much is happening right now. So much is coming out. It's hard to keep up to it. So having this relationship with manufacturing, having this ability to one-on-one and really look at the device and really find out, okay, what's coming? Because the one thing that I have noticed too is there's a plan somewhere in there. And Paul was alluding to this before as well, is you have this plan. We might not fully understand your plan. And if we can make more educated decisions on how to direct you. For an example, if you have a self-test that you're going to come in to detect a flu or a virus, and you're going to market that for only for professional use, but your intention 6 months down the road, a year down the road, is then to make it at home use. These are really really important information. Where your device is going, where you plan. Yes, it could be a 2-year, 3-year plan, but knowing that we can direct you in a way that's going to be beneficial to the company, not only in time-wise, but financially. It could be just the burden of work. Because the one thing that I have seen is a lot of the companies that are coming, especially new companies, don't have this resources of a Fortune 500 company that has 30 people in a regulatory affairs department that are handling all different aspects of it. So if we can assist you with that, if we can streamline that for you, it's only going to be beneficial to yourself. Because there is one thing that always I find not I shouldn't use the word insulting, but what I don't like to see is all the work that you guys are doing out there and all this technology and all this intellectual property that's coming together, and at the end it just gets mothballed. We want to promote Canadians inventing Canadian products for Canadians. It is very important to Health Canada. It is always one of our key initiatives to really help out Canadian manufacturers, to help you out in any way we can. Once again, like Jade said, we only license. So when it comes to the other aspects of the business, unfortunately, we don't have that ability. But when it comes down to the licensing, at least we can be that advocate in your corner to help you streamline those processes, to help you with your submissions. So just to give you an idea, Jerry and Innovation Device Manufacturer will have an opportunity to really present their newest technologies, really talk about what they're working on and how it's going to affect their application. And I would like to go back and just remind you that having these meetings and even asking that one question can save you possibly 30 days. Because just imagine if you didn't ask the question, you make a submission, and all too often people think, I just got to get my submission in. Just get it in and get the process going. That doesn't always help. Quality of information, asking the question on the front end and submitting the information that we need, we want, and that we're looking for could save so much time for you. The meetings will enable manufacturers to discuss application-related questions. So any other questions that you have, what extra information? How would you like the format? Is there a way that you want me to present my clinical data? These questions, once again, can save you a lot of frustration and extra time in the back end. And an innovation meeting would take place either early in the process or preclinical or pre-submission meeting.
So Brian, can I see Alexis has a question. So
I'm sorry, Alexis, I didn't see your hand. I apologize.
Oh, good. No. I was just kind of wondering out loud in my head. I don't have a submission, but I was thinking for others. If they're connecting to you prior to putting in a submission, does Health Canada keep note of that? So when a submission comes in, there's a file already sort of there that says, oh, these are the people that were asking questions ahead of time. And do they get a jump in? I mean, I'm sure it doesn't get a jump up in the chain of command, but is there a record that you keep so that it twigs in your computer system, say, when a submission goes in?
Yeah, we would keep that information, but and Jade, jump in anytime that you would like to, because I know you've seen these. But the other thing that's going to happen here is, I'm just going to use Jade's example, and if Jade was in that position, where Jade would be the one that's actually looking at the application that you're going to submit. So Jade's already had a relationship with you, Alexis, already talked to you, is already very familiar with your product. So when it comes in, already has all that information right here. So that's really the benefit of it, is because you have a person that's going to be looking at your application, already had a conversation. They're not coming into the information cold. Did you want to add anything to that, Jade?
Yes. Yeah, when you connect to people for the first time, just make sure your questions are specific. So we encourage people to navigate through the Health Canada website, the medical devices website, at least look at the guidance document to get more specific questions on your device or your submission. And when you will have responses to your questions within a week, but in terms of submitting a license application, as soon as you submit your license application, most submissions, we get them through email in a zip folder. I mean, we are just moving to online submission. We are not there yet. It's just a pilot project with the US FDA. So, but most applications come through email. A license application will be generated and will be provided to you. As soon as you have the license application number, you can link with anyone and ask for the status of your application or whether you have questions or concerns. So it goes by license application number.
So as someone who's done this before, my recommendation to any of you out there is use, as Paul put it, common sense. It's not a matter of picking up the phone and calling an agent up to chat with them or because you're bored. You have to respect their time. This is not a phone calling service. It's not a friend. You want to be there to ask questions that will help you advance their review of your file. It's important to develop relationships, but you can also develop bad relationships by wasting people's time.
Joseph, I really appreciate you saying that, because it does happen quite frequently. People just want to call up to ask very, very general questions. And I don't like to be the one to say, okay, stop connecting with us, because that's not our intention. But at the same time, we need to maximize our resources. These are very technical people. These are doctors. These are scientists. And their day is really to touch and answer as many questions as possible. So what I would suggest is we do have, and in the next couple slides, if we could just go to the next slide, please. I'm not going to go through each one of these with great detail, but I have given additional information here because we do have other forms and other resources that are available. One of them is just our generic email, and that usually comes with a really bad stigma. Where, oh, generic email, it goes into nowhere land and nobody responds to it. I can say 100%. I know the team. I talk to the team. I've in most cases, in some cases, even trained the team, and really, they want to help you. They know even more so than I do. They would know who the right person to send that off to. Is it instantaneous? No, absolutely not. And I won't try to sell you down that it is instantaneous, but they're quick. And they're going to get back to you as quickly as possible on those questions. What a pre-sub meeting and what a one of these meetings are for is, once again, you're going to ask a lot of questions. You're going to have everything detailed. We're going to already know those questions. So we're going to come prepared and we're going to get the most out of that. It's not it's not a meet and greet. It is to answer, once again, those technical questions. So I put this one up here underneath the tools. It's a medical device licensing e-learning course. If you have anyone on your team that you would like to give the Canadian Regulatory Requirements 101, I highly suggest this. And I think Arishi is on the call right now and has had the opportunity to go through it. So I would love to hear your feedback as well, because we provided this in another presentation that we did. And the feedback that I get is very, very good. It's not start and stop. You can come back to it as much as you want. And just in case you don't think you got anything, at the end, you get a certificate. You can print that off. But I think it's really good for your team if you have people that want to learn more about the regulatory system, because the thing that I find is, especially in these positions, you usually have somebody wearing many different hats. So they can't be an expert at everything. So this is a really good tool to go back to, that if you did have question, okay, I remember Jade was talking about this MDSAP. What exactly is it about? It'll give you more information on that. And next slide, please.
So I also want to add, in our accelerator at the University of Toronto that deals with health, we actually insist that people are at a certain level before they are allowed to engage with our regulatory mentors, which is even before we encourage them to reach out to Health Canada. These are very, very specialized and highly in-demand people, and the last thing you want to do when they're volunteering is to waste their time. So if we don't feel a venture is ready, we don't actually make those introductions until they show that they understand things. So taking a course like this, very, very important. And I think it shows that you're putting in the effort.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, thanks, Brian. I can just emphasize it from our experience. I think I met Brian and the team, I think in 2019. And I wish, when I was in the health tech startup world, in the sense of running my own company, I wish I'd got all of this. I knew it existed, and it would have just, not only shortened my timeline, but changed a lot of the trajectories of decisions we would make. And I think a lot of times people, I think Joseph has addressed this and Brian has, but there's this fear of regulatory, because you're worried, you're going to say something, you're going to get in trouble. That rarely happens. What often happens is, if you're not prepared and you don't use the language that the quality of information you provide, because you haven't understood the language, then that message gets distorted and it gets confusing for the regulator to evaluate what you're doing. And then you don't get in trouble, but you get a bunch of questions, because the regulator is very rightly saying, I'm confused by what you're saying. What does this even mean? And that what does this even mean is where I see most companies get floundered and get stressed. And the best way to address it is put the time in now, even when you're in this ideation phase, so you don't feel stressed. You're like, okay, I'm very clear about what I'm trying to build and what language to use that communicates not just to me and my team, whether we're engineers or academics, but to the regulator, to a broader audience. So thanks, Brian. I just thought I'd chime in there.
Arushi, I really appreciate that. There was a comment that came up. Everyone can have a copy of this presentation, so you don't have to like scramble around and try to get all these links down. Joseph, if you wouldn't mind, would you be able to share that with everyone?
Absolutely.
Okay, that'd be fantastic, because that's why I really put these down. And just to go back, Arushi, I really do appreciate you just came onto a really good point. We are not the regulatory, we're what's called ROBI. ROBI is the Regulatory Operations and Enforcement Branch. They're going out there, they're auditing you. And I do understand, even that team I can speak for, they're there to help. Yes, they have a job. They do want to go through and make sure that you are compliant. And if you're not compliant, how to assist you to get you to compliance. But we are licensing. All we're here to do is help you through this process from going from not licensed to licensed. That the more you tell us and the more you can communicate is the more that we can come back to you and probably save you a lot of time where you're trying to jump through these hoops. We can just come out and say, no, this is how it has to happen. It's very regulated. It's I say easy, but I'm a regulatory person. I've always been a regulatory. For somebody that hasn't seen it, yes, it could be difficult, but allow us to help you with that. Allow us to provide you documents and ask for those guidance documents. When you're speaking to someone, say, do you have any guidance documents on that? So this way it gives them the opportunity to send you with something that you can start reading, going through and absorbing and digesting this information on your own. Joseph, I think we lost the presentation.
Yeah, the connection just dropped. There, it's back again.
Okay, I can really sum this up so we can start answering any questions you want. All the information's in there. I really urge you to go in and look at these different links, because I kind of handpicked them for this team. So I think you're really going to appreciate some of the things that we did provide. And once again, Joseph has my my information, has my contact information. At a minimum, if you get lost, I'm not going to give you my home number or my home address. I personally don't do house calls, but I'd be more than happy to receive an email from you and assist you. That's really what we're trying to do here. We're trying to walk the walk and talk the talk. and really show you that there is a relationship that can be built with Health Canada, that we're not a yes or no organization, that we're just going to throw up the flags and say no, and then we don't want to talk to you anymore. I keep using the analogy like we're all in a school bus and we got to keep that school bus going. And it's whatever we can do to assist you. So if you do run into a situation where you hit a brick wall, and you will, we are a very large organization, and our website, I'll be the first to admit it, and I know Jade will too, it's very convoluted. It's massive. Finding things is sometimes really difficult. You can save yourself a lot of heartache by going to one of our generic emails, sending it through the single window portal and say, hey, I'm looking for this document. Can you help me? That is a response that I assume that you're going to get back right away, because that's what we do. We have access to this information. We can respond. So instead of going on getting frustrated and trying to surf through all this information, by all means, use these contacts that I'm giving you and ask that question and save yourself that frustration, save yourself that time. Wait until you get into the thick of it to get frustrated. Don't get frustrated on the front end.
So,
So
go
can
ahead,
I comment on the last slide, please? Just one thing.
Sure, go ahead. Sorry,
Yeah, so in the last slides, we have provided 3 emails. The first, we don't see it yet. So
just 1 second. It's my other computer's having issues with connectivity. I will do my best. Just give me a second. While I'm doing that, I'm going to talk as well out loud to say that there are also other resources, and part of what we're doing, those of you that are from different parts of Canada, as we're building out our networks here, we know that there are different incubators, accelerators, whether it's the Hunter Hub in Calgary or other sort of province supported incubators around health. They are increasingly there to help you navigate these systems, and it's important that you do reach out, and that even if we don't know the answers or our mentors don't know the answers to something, we can help you work through it in order to better guide you towards Health Canada and the FDA. Is this the slide, Jade?
no, the last one, the very last one. Yeah, if we go back once with one slide. Yes, so just wanted to highlight, we have provided 3 emails in this slide. The first email, if you have any questions about licensing medical devices, about finding an information online, finding a guidance document, getting a link to the e-learning course, any external request has to be directed to the first email. The second one is for quality management certification, the MDSAP I mentioned previously. So we have the email. Just if you would like to get information about the MDSAP, this is a key email because it's important. We had rejected license applications for class 2, 3, and 4 because the manufacturers weren't compliant with for MDSAP certification. And it takes time and money to get an MDSAP certification. Just to make sure we understand this information. And the last email is for the medical device establishment licensing unit. This is a different section from what we do for licensing medical devices, because our directorate is responsible for licensing class 2, 3, and 4 medical devices. But we have within Health Canada a different section which is called Medical Device Establishment Licensing Unit, responsible for authorizing class 1 medical devices and authorizing importation and distribution of any device class 1, 2, 3, and 4. So just to make the difference between to what email you should go if you have any questions.
Thanks for that clarification, Jade. Absolutely 100% correct, because sometimes I think people have a hard time grasping that. I know I've talked to people before and said, oh, well, I contacted Health Canada, and I think they're assuming that maybe there's like 30 people that work for Health Canada, and we're all in the same room and we can talk to each other. That's really not the case. We are thousands and thousands of employees that come together in very unique different areas. And one of those unique areas, like Jade was saying, is the medical device establishment licensing. So if you came through our group, we would have to pass you on. And I do understand how frustrating that can be at times, is when you finally do get somebody on the phone and then you get passed off. That's why these links are so important, and that's why it is really important to utilize the resources that we do have available by asking these questions, such as, I have an establishment licensing question, who's the best to answer that? And Jade and I know that would be the regulatory operations and enforcement branch. They handle that. They would be responsible for the medical device establishment license, and we know the people to bring you to, and that's why utilizing these, like I said, generic emails can really save you a lot of time.
I have to say that I think that point needs to be stressed. It's been sort of my personal experience that starting in the right place with the right people can save a lot of time. Being bounced back from person, unit, department to department because you're not using the right language or not starting with the right people can be really frustrating, but also it's a waste of everybody's time and resources. So this is as an innovator, as an ideas person, that's sort of, you need to take the initiative to learn how to navigate the system.
So I put some contact information in there, as well as I put an appendix in there, and it just gives you some additional information just on some of the classifications, some of the different rules that we have when classifying a medical device. We don't have to go through that. I just wanted to make sure that you had a copy of it. These contacts right here are important too. These are invoicing and fees, medical device compliance and disputes. This is really important, that if you do have run into a situation where there's a manufacturer out there that is producing, or in many cases that we see, the most cases I would say of non-compliance is really the distribution of medical devices, that you see this, that we do find out about it. It's vitally important. Once again, and I think Joseph said this right away, as soon as we started this presentation, that we're not making a widget. We're making important devices that affect people's lives. And the one thing that I can say is I took the time to really go out and talk to patient groups and really talk to groups of men, women, and children that have been negatively affected by a medical device. And at no point in time do you realize how important our jobs are that are on this phone. It's vitally important that we get this right, and we get it right the first time, because an adverse event, or many adverse events to a group of people, can have devastating results. And once again, we just want to make sure that our mandate is to ensure the safety and effectiveness of medical devices for sale in Canada. And we take that job very seriously. So I urge you to ask questions, because sometimes I think people just don't understand why we do some of the things we do. But at the end of the day, we're safeguarding the masses. So even though you might say, well, that's just common sense to me, common sense isn't always common. So not everybody will understand something. And as well as, then you get into situations where there could be an international manufacturer. Maybe their English is a second language. Maybe they're not understanding. Maybe something's lost in that translation. That's where we have to be extra careful on what we say, what we do, and how we say it and do it. So I just urge you to always verify. And once again, when you're utilizing these resources, there is nothing wrong. And I actually urge you, get it in writing. So if we're making a claim on something, if we're going to tell you, oh, that's a class 2 medical device, you can easily, and no one's going to be offended by this. This is our job. Say, can I please have that in writing? So this way you have it for your records. You have it moving forward. It can only help you. And then, as well as this last one here, is to submit a voluntary complaint. And then as well as, you can go into, you can take a look at the appendix, but we don't have to go through it. So if nobody has any questions, I can put it back to you, Joseph.
Well, I want to stress another thing that, so I have to tell you that it's my experience that regulatory talks don't draw the biggest crowds. Generally, I don't know why, but for some reason, people, unless they really have to know it for as needed, most people are not all that interested in regulatory affairs.
Jade, he's saying we're not rock stars. Can you believe that?
Well, neither are academics, right? Until you actually need something, you generally don't really want to learn a lot about the specifics. But the reality is that it can save people so much time and money to know these things for example, I don't know if it still exists or why you may not have mentioned it. A few years back, there was actually an online tool that would help you classify your device before you even spoke to anyone. So you can go to the Health Canada website, and there was assistance to be able to understand what your classification would be. So that way you can tailor your product and your application to that area and what you would need for that.
Can I comment on this, Joseph? Yeah. So maybe it had existed before I joined the medical devices director, but the online consultation goes through emails, because as I mentioned at the beginning of this session, we rely on the entire description of the device to make the appropriate classification. And you are right when you say it saves time and money, because the problem is we don't have within the regulations provisions for refunds. So manufacturers may pay $10,000, and when we move a file to scientific review and it's being rejected, there is no refunds. We have refunds at early stages of processing, but we don't have refunds at final stages when the file is under scientific review. So this is a key information to know too for licensing process.
Okay, Paul, you've been very silent. And Terry, go ahead.
Actually, I kind of wanted to reiterate. I have a question, and also just wanted to reiterate something Paul had mentioned early on, which was as a person with lived experience myself, and how important that engagement is early on, but as well as throughout the whole process. So I would really encourage you to keep going back to those people that you've engaged and asking them for their opinions throughout the whole process. Another question to Health Canada is, do you guys have any requirements for the involvement of people with lived experience when you're talking about medical devices and approvals?
Go ahead, Jade.
I just wanted to understand your question. So, getting feedback from patients or any medical device users. So we do meet with patient groups representatives. We also, when we come up with any guidance document or regulatory changes, we have online consultation. With the online consultation, we do communicate with our different stakeholder groups, which are patient representatives, industry representatives and industry, and research institutions, RABs, research ethics board. So all these groups, depending on the regulatory changes, we do communicate with them. And there is another key information to highlight is with when medical devices are in the Canadian market. So we have a way to monitor their safety and efficacy. How? Through getting all incident reports. it's not mandatory for a patient or a medical device user to submit an incident report online, even if we have forms online. But now it's mandatory for healthcare professionals to submit any incident report that happened to a patient, with using a specific medical device. So in addition to industry, it has always been mandatory, but now, since last year, we are making this mandatory for healthcare professionals. So this is just to come up to one of your questions, Joseph, that you submitted through email. Yeah, one of the regulatory changes is with the post-market surveillance. So now we can go to industry and request assessment reports of any other regulatory agencies. We made submitting incident reports mandatory for healthcare professionals. Those are just examples of regulatory changes.
That's actually a fairly big change, and a very important one. The obligation to report incidents from the healthcare professional side, that's putting some teeth behind.
Yeah, exactly.
Paul, any thoughts on these, or any questions from the audience?
I've got I think the most compelling question so far I've got is, Jade, you've got Cristiano Ronaldo and Lionel Messi behind you. Which one is the better one? Come on, put it on the line. No, really, seriously, which one?
You got to say Messi. You have to. Come on.
I agree. It's got to be Messi. So why have you got both of them on your wall? You're right. There we go. Everybody agrees. Good. I want to hear the backstory on that sometime. I got a couple of thoughts, a couple of comments, and I've been in this game since I emigrated here, as you can tell from my accent, since 1997, and I have, prior to now, met one other Health Canada person outside of speaking with Health Canada. So guys, the fact that you're here is absolutely awesome. Your other colleague I met was a guy called Fred, when he and I were doing independent technical and business review of ACOA AIF projects in Atlantic Canada about a decade ago. And he was just about retiring then. So I'm not going to ask you whether you know Fred, because it was a decade ago and you guys are 3 and 5 years, and that's like someone asking me whether I know John Smith in London. So let's not do that. But what I will say is, it's great that you're here. I am delighted to see Health Canada people out there and in the milieu talking to early stage entrepreneurs, because Joseph, you're closing the gap as I think is necessary. Second thing I really like to hear is that, and I know it's counterintuitive and we're all a bit fed up with Zooming, but the fact that Health Canada is making digital innovation meet and greets available is terrific. I'm really encouraged and infused behind that. And so I think that's all very good. What I do think we've got to be careful is talk about drinking from the fire hose. I have heard a lot of acronyms and a lot of departments and a lot of levels of certification in the last hour, and I'm a little spinny and I know what you guys are talking about. So I usually say, I have entrepreneurs who come and pitch medical device and whatever things here. And my daughter's now 15, but they used to have to pitch it at the level of when she was 8 years old, like grade 6, grade 8, whatever. I'd appreciate if you guys dumb it down a bit further in general. But I'm so glad you're here, and I'm so happy to see and hear and meet. I don't know if you guys noticed, the first thing I did was write your names down and your backgrounds and what departments you're working in, because I will be coming back to you. I guarantee you that. So this is great.
And Paul, if I can add to that, we've done more outreach. I would say, if you take away the pandemic, take away that time, that year and a half that we've been in this fog.
Yeah.
Before that, in 2 years, we did more outreach than we did 15 years together, like all included. And the one thing Jade and I will be doing, we started it 2 years before the pandemic. So we would have started in 2018, 2019, where we go from one side of the country right to the other.
Yeah.
We get together. I heard Starfish get mentioned. We partner with Starfish. We talk to them because they have some resources. Bring more people, startups, academia. We try to hit everybody, First Nations, our entire stakeholder. We cast our bets as far as we can. So please stay in touch with your organizations, because we will be coming out and it will give you the opportunity that we can have more one-on-one talks. And we really do. When I go on one of these trips, I give 24/7 to it. It's really about setting up as many meetings and as many connections as possible. So this is something that we are doing. When that's going to come up again, I don't know. Once again, I don't have that crystal ball. But once we're able to, and this isn't going to be just, and the thing that we recognize is we're not just going to go to Toronto. We're not just going to go to Vancouver, Calgary. We're going to go to some of the outlying areas as well, because we do understand that it's hard. If you go out east, where does everyone go? Halifax, right? And everybody else from Atlantic Canada has to come to Halifax. Well, we don't want it. We want to make sure that we're hitting all the different areas. We're hitting all the different universities. We're hitting all these places. So please stay in touch. If there's anything I can do to provide any additional information on that, please let me know. But Jade and I, and as well as some other members of Health Canada, we get together with Roby, our program partners, and they come along with us. So this way you're going to get everything. You're going to get a little flavor. You're going to get device licensing. You're going to get some of the initiatives that we're doing. You're going to get enforcement. You're going to have a chance to really talk at a broad spectrum of Health Canada. And once again, and I do thank you, Paul, for saying that. As much as we try, I know we do get carried away with the acronyms. My first year, I really think that's all my job was, is trying to learn what the heck people are talking about. And all the different departments that I work with, it was difficult. Even coming down to department from the private industry, a department is HR, it's marketing. A department is Health Canada. A department is it's so much different, and I do appreciate that. My idea of getting a little handbook, and it's almost like you're in another country speaking another language. They haven't done that for me yet. I think it'd be great to pass that out, but I appreciate that feedback.
The only reason I'm giving that comment is because every time I start running a new company with engineers, hardware and software people, they're talking in their language and I'm talking in the business language. And again, they don't know the acronyms I'm using. So it's just a, it's a filter thing through and a familiarization process.
So a few years back, the Health Innovation Hub, which is my other hat, we made a handbook to translate Health Canada E's and FDA E's and several other E's into English, and we had to split it up into 3 handbooks. And so it was very much, there's a lot to know and it's not necessarily consistent. And right now, be careful what you ask for, Brian, because we're in my other role, we have 140 ventures right now that we're mentoring. And that's one incubator out of 13 at the U of T alone. We start bringing in some of the other partners in this Ideation Praxis Challenge from Calgary. The Hunter Hub covers the whole city. U of A we've been talking to. So you could have a huge audience if you would like, and we'll put them up. But I think it's important to figure out how do we communicate some of this stuff so you don't need 3 handbooks for Health Canada alone, and then you have to throw them away and relearn things for the FDA or the EU, and each regulatory sort of jurisdiction, especially as Canadians, we tend to look at other markets. How do we make sure that when we get into our own market that we understand how to do that quickly and efficiently?
Unfortunately, the reality of it is you got to engulf yourself. If you're only sticking your toe in, you're never going to have that full understanding. Like I said, I come from regulatory. I had 20 years experience before I joined Health Canada, and I still came in and my head was spinning. It's the way of the land. You just need to, You need to ask questions. You need to verify, because you say there's some inconsistencies. You're right, because people start recycling acronyms, and what used to be EPAC before is not EPAC now. That was something that I learned about like 10 years ago, and now it's all on the digital health side. So it's just, once again, it's just about just understanding. And I think everyone has to have an understanding and appreciation that we're not all going to know everything. Even some of the best generalists that I know will be the first to put up their hand and say, no, I have to go to people. There's certain people that I go to for those technical questions, because unfortunately our brains are still only that big and we can only handle that so much information.
No, I hear you. And, you know, knowing some of what's happening in the EU, knowing some of what's coming down in the pipeline in the UK, anything that you may know or have known 2 years ago is outdated today, and may be outdated in 6 months, whatever you know today. So it's really hard to stay on top of these things. So having connections, being able to ask questions, the fact that you're reaching out, I think is amazing, but it's also about the young entrepreneurs knowing that they can reach out, and if they prepare and don't waste time, it will be appreciated and reciprocated. Right, Sarah? I'm assuming that's one of the things that's on your agenda. So, well, why don't you introduce yourself? So put you on the spot, but you have an opportunity here. You have to unmute yourself first.
Sorry, I tried to do it on my end. You beat me to it though. So do you want me to just introduce the company and like what we're trying to do?
Yeah,
Okay.
that was part of the point that we were supposed to get into. So.
Yeah, for sure. So, so me and my team are developing a breathalyzer, if you will, that's going to help with allergy detection and food sensitivity detection. So what we're trying to do is basically give people an understanding of whether it is worth pursuing some additional testing through an allergy clinic. And if the response is that yes, they should, how do they modify their diet or get sort of like additional supports through dietitians, nutritionists to be better able to manage their conditions. So I know that sounds very broad. We're actually starting off with gluten sensitivities and allergies, because very often people proclaim to have food sensitivities when it comes to gluten allergies, or sorry, gluten sensitivities. And so we're trying to understand exactly what would be best for them. We're still in talks with allergists and family physicians just to better understand what the outcomes usually are from these conversations. However, there's kind of like overarching kind of consensus that the food allergy testing as it exists right now isn't helpful, and there's a lot further investigation that's required. But more than just that, there's a management aspect that could be kind of patient-centered and patient-focused. So that's why we're developing that breathalyzer that can allow the patients to repeatedly assess themselves. And then based on the outcome, they can kind of modify their diets to better kind of reduce the symptoms of gluten intolerance that they're currently experiencing. If that makes sense.
So we have a lot of these and hopefully more coming. I'm looking at the time right now, and I just wanted to say thank you to all of you. I hope that this was useful and informative, and I know that it's the summer and the weather is so beautiful outside, and you guys have made a heroic sacrifice to actually stay for over an hour and a half and chat and learn. And I'm hoping that we continue to spread this information, because I think in future iterations, we'll really start at the beginning and look at regulatory pathways and as we develop ideas. So I'd like to thank Brian and Jade and Paul for participating. I'd also like to thank Praxis for their continued support in this challenge. And I would encourage those of you that have ideas, those of you working on ideas, submit them to the Ideation Clinic. We will review them and try and find ways to help you get your ideas off the ground. And I want to thank Terry and Alexis for joining us and providing their perspectives. I know that, again, their opinions and their contributions are invaluable as we go through thinking about these areas. And most of all, as well, I would like to thank the Ideation Clinic team, Jillian, Julia, Zoya, who is still here, and Chris, who had to go, unfortunately. We welcome your feedback, because we are going to be revamping these workshops significantly for the next round, to be more in line with some of the challenges and some of the outputs. So, you know, any thoughts on how to make these more practical and useful for the development of devices and for the outputs is much appreciated. And we have one more in this round left on June 7th. So if you're interested in implementation strategies and evaluation, and how do you access hospital spaces, community spaces, let's talk. And I want to thank everyone for participating.
Thank you, everyone.